Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 156 of the Peak of Serenity
Yeah.
podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, Emerson, and joining me, we have my co host, Namali.
Hello.
And this week, there were so many interviews. I swear, it was like a couple a day, and we're not going to talk about all of them, but we are going to talk about a lot of them.
Yeah.
Because interviews mean news and new tidbits, insight into like the developer and designer philosophy, all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, we're going to talk a lot about interviews. There's also some relevant hot fixes for most. So,
Yes. Yeah. A couple of last minute changes like Blizzard likes to do, which we'll probably see more of this week into next week also, which will be fun to keep track of. Um but yeah, I guess before we get into that, how was your was this your final raid week? Did you,
yep.
I know you were talking about it, but was this your final raid week before the new content in 10.1?
We ended up deciding to just call it the last week. Next week,
Oh,
we are
nice.
going to do just like a strat review with the team for
Mhm.
next tier. And that way we can kind of make sure everybody is, reasonably familiar with the new bosses.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, like it's one of the perks of being a weekend team is that we can actually have the luxury of time on release week. Like Tuesday raid, uh, or Tuesday comes and raids happen, and we just get to like go steal other people's kill VODs.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but like people prepping 9 bosses in between Tuesday when that happens and Friday when we raid is a lot. So we're like pushing people to prep now, and we're gonna have a strat session on this coming Friday instead of raiding, and go over everything but like Sarkareth basically,
Yeah.
for heroic, and then the first like 3 or 4 bosses on mythic. And then
Nice.
Sarkareth will just like steal kill VODs, right? We're not
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
we're not
Week
gonna talk
of.
about Sarkareth.
Nice. 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 Well, congrats on finish out 10.0
Yeah,
raid
we did
wise.
it.
Yeah.
We had a sale Friday, actually, our first mythic sale of the tier and our last mythic sale of the tier.
That is
Um,
awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, we did our typical clear. We're actually still raiding this week coming up. We'll raid on Tuesday if servers allow, or Thursday. But just one day, and we'll do as much as we can. Probably in about like 2.5, 3 hours, and then sort of call it quits. Whatever
yeah,
we kill, and that'll be it. Won't go the full time. So yeah, we had a solid clear this week. But we have a bunch. Like we've probably added, I think, like 2 or 3 people to the roster. So
yeah,
um we'll have them in this week coming up, and yeah, we'll see going in. I started my prep at least on healer stuff. So um it's always the fun time of like looking at logs, looking at PTR stuff,
yeah. Trying to
trying
figure
to
out
figure out
what what's going
what's
on.
important. Yeah, what's important and what's not, right? And like like trying to remember, did this boss change post testing, like where we don't have logs or not
Yeah,
for it?
I've been
So
doing some Wipe Fest stuff for work, and
mhm.
there's multiple bosses now that we're gonna have to go back and make adjustments to because they got changes. Like
Yeah.
Mangrax actually got some pretty significant changes this week. Um, like it used to be that the mythic changes you could not fully remove the puddles.
Mhm.
That's no longer the case. You can fully remove the puddles now. They had added the mechanic where if you reach 20 stacks of the dot, it instantly kills you.
Yeah.
Um, Now that's 50 stacks of the dot.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Okay.
which I mean, I'm not sure how you get there unless they really reduce the amount of damage you take per stack, because like 50 stacks of the dot at the numbers it was for the mythic testing would like one shot you anyway.
Yeah, any tick, yeah, at that point, yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure what that's about. But
That's funny.
yeah, and then like amalgamation chamber, I know got changes because I was looking at that this week to do prep for the strat session next week. And that boss, the mythic version of it, the current version is basically the same, but the mythic version of it got changed pretty significantly.
Mhm.
As far as like the dot mechanic, like there's no more. So on, uh, like there's shadow and there's flame, and on heroic when you go into phase 2, there's a shadow flame dot that replaces the phase 1 dot. On mythic, that dot no longer exists. You still get the shadow and flame ones, which means you have to like clears in
Hmm.
phase 2. I guess that's kind of the intention for mythic, is that you like have to do these end-to-end style clears in phase 2, minus the raid wipe if any wrong color touch, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So that, yeah, I can't wait to try and piece that together. So I started a little bit on like I think I'm done like the first two bosses. So
yeah.
been slowly getting into it. Try and do it the rest of this week. So, but yeah, no, it was a clean raid week, and yeah, I'm just excited for 10-1. We'll see how we start the tier. So,
Yeah.
but cool. I guess before we get into all the interview stuff, there's just a couple of things that happened this week, just to sort of touch on quickly. First up, I think is our monthly. They released the May trading post rewards, and so they're terrible. But for people who care, the main reward this month is a battle pet called Pippin. It looks kind of like a mechanical dog, like a mecha dog. That's cool, I guess. I don't really like pets. I use
It's a
like the
mecha dog for
BlizzCon
the mecha
pets.
gnome that you can now play because cross faction guilds.
I'm gonna be a regular gnome, like every normal, well-adjusted person in the world. Okay, if you're gonna play a gnome, you just play a normal gnome.
um, there's also like, I know that's like the highlight item in the
Yeah,
in the trading post this month, but it's not the best item, which is the skull belt.
yes, the skull belt, very cool. Some of the transmog this month is actually pretty cool. So yeah, there's a skull belt which looks really awesome. There's
It's
a
like a
white
ram's
hood.
head skull, yeah. For those that are listening, it's a ram's head skull. It's got the horns. It is like, it's the skull from the guy on the Warlords of Draenor loading screen.
Yes, yeah, exactly. His belt, yeah,
Yeah,
that belt,
the spooky
yeah.
axe midget one.
Oh, it's yes. There's
Um,
there's a couple like full transmogs too. So like some leather armor. And then there's a Valinor one that has some interesting horns going on it, we'll say. Um Although I will say like that the belt's good, but the cloaks are actually pretty good too. There's two or three cloak transmogs that are pretty awesome.
yeah,
And then the overall reward or the bonus reward is a Savage Green Battle Turtle mount. So which means that I literally have to now complete it out because the mount, and
I
I
mean,
collect every mount ever. So,
it's okay. How long did it take you to get 1,000 coins?
I didn't.
How?
So
I don't.
you'd be surprised to hear that like I only log into this game between the hours of 8 p.m. Eastern Tuesday and at this point 10:30 p.m. Eastern Tuesday.
Okay,
And so I don't play that often, I'll say right now.
yeah.
So
All
it's
right,
it's
all
been a
right.
struggle. It's been a struggle. So
Um, yeah, I don't know. I still haven't gone to pick up my like coins because I bought the stuff I wanted at the start of the month. But I did find out as well. Actually, they do go, like, if you leave them in the box, you can just go pick them up later. Like, it doesn't matter if you cross another. Because I went and I picked up the transmog from
oh, okay.
last month, this month.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I don't think I've picked them up either. Because you have to go to Orgrimmar for that, right?
Yeah, to go to Orgrimmar.
Or-
Yeah, as long as you earn them, they're just like sitting there in the chest. They don't
Gotcha.
like expire or go away. Um, so yeah,
Good to know. Good to know. But yeah, trading post items are cool. I mean, like I think we've talked about this system a ton. I really like it. I don't engage with it, but I think it's a cool new system for people to collect stuff, which is always awesome. The other thing that came out this week is, of course, Raider.io's seasonal recap. So, as they've been doing for the past probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 seasons, you can go to Raider.io and create your own seasonal recap. Sort of shows you all the different bosses you killed, your progression from an item level perspective, progression from an RR Raider, or sorry, a Mythic Plus score perspective, then who you've done the most dungeons with, and all that fun stuff. My graph is hilarious because the first 3 weeks is like just a forward thing to about 2,400 score, and then it's
yep,
flat the rest of the time.
yep,
um, so yeah, I will say like my guild this season super into getting portals. Basically been
yeah.
doing a bunch of portal runs for this, but I yeah
I
don't care.
actually,
So.
so my I think my monk is still marked as my main, and my main, and that's like not. I have not really looked at this season. I don't know. People were posting the funny thing this season is if you look at our Razageth, right? The mythic
Mhm.
Razageth time is just like
Yeah.
like I brought this up when we were doing our like retro for the year. We spent more time on it than every other boss combined.
Yeah.
But it's just different seeing it in graph form. You have every other boss, and then there's Razageth that's there at the end of it that is literally just like a bigger bar than every other bar added together.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that was funny too. The same. I mean, the same thing for us would. They think they do the same bar with pulls too. So you can see like your mythic pulls to first kill, and it's
Yeah.
the exact same way where it's like tiny, 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 massive bar at the end. So,
Yes.
um, which I mean, I think I'm fine with that. I think I'm fine with that. So, um, but yeah, so you can get your recap if you're into that. It's cool. Also shows you who you've done the most keys with. Funnily enough, mine is like one of my friends and then four random people who I don't know. So I pug a lot. We'll say.
Yep.
Um, so yeah. Um, but cool. So that is the Radar.io recap. We also so a couple like speculative or like future things for these final two little things that happened last week. First up is there was a push to the encrypted vendor build, an update, sorry, to the encrypted vendor build. That went to 10.1.5, which basically means that we will, PTR is already in the works for 10.1.5. So we should see that shortly, we'll say, or soon. I know that 10.0.5 was like, I feel like just weeks after like launch, like the PTR came up for that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw even by the end of May 10.1.5 hit the PTR
Yeah.
for testing. So Blizzard is fast and furious moving through these updates, which is cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, it's gonna be interesting. I wonder if we're gonna see more like talent tree reworks in 10.1.5.
yeah.
Like we saw some in 10.05. That's and then in 10.07, and it's kind of like where the paladin stuff came from.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Mistweaver even got a brand new set of talents. Like they got rid of what's the Necrolord Bone Dust Brew and gave us Shaylin's Gift, which was a
yeah,
huge change, right?
right.
Um, So it'll be interesting to see what they put in the 10.1.5 stuff for classes, um, along with the other content they have planned. Um, and the only final sort of speculative or future story is Blizzard put out sort of their own produce. They're calling it a Wowcast. They call it Episode One. Maybe this is something that they'll continue to do, but it's an internal produced interview with two of the developers. In this case, my boy Morgan was on it. Shout outs, love Morgan. And then Maria Hamilton, who's more of a story person, I believe. Which is a lot of the narrative. And a couple of just like story things that they dropped in passing. Number one, we're definitely going to see Galakrond in some form, which I mean, I don't know how much you care about the lore here, but Galakrond, of course, is like the big bad primordial that the other dragon aspects had to,
Yeah, we're gonna
imprison.
need a lore corner on that one at some point.
Oh God, okay. I will get my lore out, and if maybe we'll do that next week a little
Yeah,
bit. We'll start talking about Galakrond. But they talk a little bit about Galakrond. They talk a little bit about Irididicron, who's the big dude who's now leading the little sister and brother team of trying to mess up the world. His ultimate plan. They talked a little bit about that. And they did talk about continuing the story for a different Dragonflight. So we've gotten a little bit of like push forward with the Bronze Dragonflight so far. Green Dragonflight story, of course, is going to continue. There's speculation of the World Tree coming to the Dragon Isles to replace Teldrassil. So that'll be people not super happy about that. We'll say it's a little weird. We'll say to be that far away from Hyjal and like that stuff. But there's that, and then yeah, there's additional big story coming, of course. But yeah, we'll investigate a new Dragonflight, which I mean the only one that's left I think is maybe the Reds. 'Cause we've done green, we've done bronze. Black Dragonflight will be this one because this is going down the Neltharion path. Um, so yeah, so it's blue and green, or sorry, blue and red, which I think are the remaining ones. So um, but yeah, a nice little. And if you watch the whole interview, it's interesting. But of course, it's sort of Blizzard produced, so it's a little bit more
AG.
cagey and like more PRE, we'll say,
Yeah.
less like. Yeah, Morgan seems a little bit more stiff in this one, but still a huge fan. Still a huge fan. I'd be super embarrassed if Morgan Day ever listens to this and like fan
Like
going out over here about him. Uh,
We also have one thing for upcoming hot fixes for 10.1. This is not part of the main 10.1 patch notes. I guess those are kind of finalized.
mhm.
And then they came out and said there's going to be day one hot fixes, a day one patch for a day one patch.
Yep.
But the day one patch for a patch, which is interesting. Um, and among the other sets, there's a bunch of changes to like tier sets and some nerfs, like Fire Mage got nerfed. There's also Windwalker buffs, single target Windwalker buffs. Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick, damage increased, and the math people numbers I saw was like 2.8% damage increase on single target.
Mhm.
So it's like it's a little bump. Um, but it
Not
is
bad. Not bad.
targeted at single target. So the idea is not to dramatically increase their AoE. And as far as I know, that is what's happened. Like they've got the AoE blackout kick just like Brewmaster and um Mistweaver do. So that is technically AoE, but Tiger Palm and Rising Sun Kick got the lion's share of the buff and also are pure single target.
Yep. Yeah. Which I feel like not playing Windwalker much. I feel like this is the theme of every expansion is they just buff single target the entire expansion. Like at a certain point, like Blizzard just needs to take a look at like why do we do the same buffs over and over again? Like, does this make sense? So
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
mean, not to get too deep into the weeds on it, a lot of it I feel like stems from Fists of Fury, which is like my least favorite monk ability, and also is just AoE,
Yeah,
but also single target. And so it gets like it catches nerfs because of AoE, or like they can't tune it up as much as they want because of AoE, and it would feel weird to have it be like 90% of the damage is done to the single target because then it's not really AoE anymore, right?
exactly. Yeah,
And so it just like feels like they put everything into that, and then it's like AoE is fine, and then everything else is just bad.
yeah,
And it's not even like actually the past couple of expansions that Windwalker AoE has primarily come from Fist of Fury. Like Fist of Fury is good, but they've got the Bone Dust Brew stuff with Spinning Crane Kick.
gotcha.
So I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes with them. But yeah, slight buffs. And this, I think, as we get into it, this is mentioned in multiple interviews. This is not the only round of hot fixes we'll see. So we'll definitely see some stuff next week after they get a little bit of data on how 10.1, early 10.1 goes. And then we'll probably see even more, excuse me, you know, going through heroic week, or at least entering into that heroic mythic raid launch. We probably won't see anything the first 2 weeks of the raid, and then we'll start to see more coming out of that. Once Race for World First and all that stuff is done,
Yeah.
we'll probably see some more class changes at that point. So,
Yep.
um, so cool. So yeah. So other than that, patch notes are out there. There was nothing hot fix. There's no real hot fixes for Mistweaver that I remember that are super important. Um, and yeah, I don't think you said there's nothing really big. We've covered all the big ones for Mystery Release. Nothing really big for Brewmaster. So,
Yeah. I mean, the only
um,
Brewmaster related thing is the nerf Protection Paladin. But it's not like a huge nerf, so
fair, fair enough. Well, cool. So now I think there was, as a part of the interviews, there's a bunch of Mythic Plus information that came out of those. So I want to spend a little bit of time going through sort of a quick hit on some key Mythic Plus stuff that was dropped in these interviews. So the first one is Blizzard actually came out with what is happening to keys when you are moving from the first week of 10.1 into the second week of 10.1. And so we're basically into the first week of season 2, essentially. And so that is that keys are going to drop by 10 levels, meaning if you complete a 17 in time, this week coming up, so starting the next reset, that key level will drop by 10. So you'll get a +7 key in your vault. Which means generally speaking, if you're trying to min max, you want to complete a 26 coming up in this week so that
yeah.
you have a 16 in your vault for next
You
week. At least you
actually
can get some
you
currency.
you would want to get a 27, so that because okay, I actually did a thing for our
Oh,
team
okay.
as part of prep for next season. It's like, we set expectations for what we want people to do, 17s you switch from the champion item upgrade track, which caps at 337, hero
Oh,
one
right.
that caps at 441. So it's only like 4 eye levels different, but that's like the point where you can upgrade things as high as you can from Mythic Plus. Um,
I forgot about that
so
stupid convoluted system.
so I mean the moral of the story is do 17s, not 16s.
Yeah.
If you want to be really efficient, you do 19s if you can do 19s efficiently, because that just gives you more of the currency, so it takes fewer keys, and you have to
Right.
spend less on upgrading them because they start at a higher item level. But 17 is like the point where you can upgrade things to max. Um, the but yeah, it's good. Good luck getting it
Yeah.
27 done.
7 time this week. Yeah. Coming up.
Uh,
Um,
there's
man,
not
this
not a
is I
lot of
think a
people that can do that.
yeah, this is a massive drop. I mean, typically it was a 4 key level. I think
Yeah,
4 or 5 was like the previous season. So,
and
um,
I mean, I have I don't know what to think about this. On the one hand, like the previous one could put you in a situation where it like mostly lined up with the changes, but then you would go and do the new dungeons or like do the
mhm,
dungeons with the new seasonal effects and like just like rip your keys. And it's
right.
like, maybe it is correct for them for like from a eliminating frustration kind of perspective to start people off lower, because if you are just coming in and crushing it, right, you can
Right.
very rapidly make up that gap. It's going to take you 2+3s to get back to where it would have been with a -4 drop, and then it from there, like, I mean, it's not it. So like, if you do a 20, which is what I'll be doing, you do a 20, you time your 20, you then start the first week of season 2 with a 10,
Right.
and like you do a couple keys to get that up to a 16, 17, and it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So like, yeah, it basically just makes it so you're not like bricking keys right off the start. You're low
Right.
enough where you can learn the mechanics and learn the new
Yeah.
dungeons a little bit better. So
Yeah.
no,
And
that's fair.
I think that kind of reasoning goes double for the way the season is structured now, where it's a whole new pool of dungeons, and that's way more than like, you know, going from like Prideful season into season 2 of Shadowlands was not the same, or going from what's it called? The what was the We had the Uldir fix, and I'm blanking on the name. Going into
A
the
reaping.
Yeah, like, or no, it was the one before that, but Infested. So you went like Infested into
Impressive.
Reaping, and that was pretty easy because Reaping was easy. But then you went Reaping into the one after that with the stupid Ajara mobs, and
Oh
that
yeah.
was a very significant step up.
Yeah. And then you ended with the like the portal like the portal mobs or whatever.
Yeah,
Uh
yeah.
yeah.
So like, it's like really not going to take very long to go back up to whatever level, because of
Hmm.
the whole like going up multiple at a time. Um,
Yep.
yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, so but yeah, it's a 10 item level drop, so or sorry, 10 key level drop, not item level drop, but 10 key level drop for whatever you complete next week, this week coming up. For the the first week at 10.1. And then season 2 will start the second week of 10.1 and yeah, you'll get a key that's 10 item or 10 levels lower than what you completed in time the previous week. So um but cool. So that came out of one of the interviews. The other thing that was pushed yeah, last week was they've removed, so this is specific to Freehold. Is they removed the captain event. So the second encounter, if you don't remember, or in original Freehold is you had to do one of 3 crew events to basically ally with one of the captains, which would remove that captain from the second boss encounter, and then also remove their crew from the trash in that secondary area. And so what happens now on current PTR is that you are automatically aligned to one of the captains, regardless of what you do. So you no longer have to complete those events. The one we'll say change here is that while you're allied with one of the captains, their crew does not also ally with you,
Right.
meaning you now are left with larger trash pulls essentially through that second area, more consistent trash pulls because it's always going to be the same thing. But they'll be larger in the second section of the dungeon as you clear to the second boss. So one nice thing, I mean, of those three, I feel like they weren't too big of a deal, but like the one where you had to like do the canisters around the area was always annoying because you ended up pulling all that trash anyway. Or like the dog one too was kind of annoying. So
Yeah,
um
this is
yeah.
like so in BFA where the dungeon was just always active for the
Mhm.
entire expansion, people just learned how to do these efficiently. Like you would go and you join a group and you would have a druid in it, and the druid would just know how to do the dog one,
Yeah.
or you'd have a rogue and the rogue would know how to do the dog one. So you would do
Yeah.
it very efficiently. With this only being a season long, I feel like this is them saying we don't want people to have to learn three different sets of RP for this dungeon.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, the trash in the upper area basically didn't get pulled except for what you needed to do whichever event it was.
Mhm.
At least in like the upper weekly key territory. Maybe they did it in like very high keys because of efficiency or whatever, but upper weekly key territory, you just like pulled what you needed for the event and that's it. But some of this trash is down in the boss area too. Like there's a couple of these trash packs in the boss area for the Council of Captains have
Mhm.
actually got uh like you would only normally fight 2/3 of the trash because the other third would be part of the captain's crew, and so you would only have ever fought it on accident
Yeah.
from failing to actually align with the captain, which I have definitely had happen before, where we had somebody that like didn't click the mug or whatever to.
The drinking one. That was
Yeah,
so annoying. That somebody
yeah,
knew in. Yeah.
definitely had that happen where we would get down there and we'd like be pulling the trash. And I'm like, wait a second, there's extra trash here. What are we
Yeah.
doing? And then you look at the bosses, it's like, wait a second, they're all three active. Who didn't drink?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely part of it is just to, yeah, I think make sure people don't have to remember to do this and then two just sort of streamlines the dungeon slightly. And it'll always then be consistent like trash wise, right?
Yeah. The
Which yeah.
bosses still rotate. You don't get to pick which one you ally, and you never have had the ability to pick which one you ally with outside of like
Yeah.
heroic. Maybe I don't know. Mythic, you've never
Uh,
been able to.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's I don't know. It seems okay.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to for this one. I actually really like Freehold as a dungeon, so had a lot of fun in there. Um the other Mythic Plus change for this week is we're talking about affixes again. For like the fourth week in a row. But this week it's not entangling. We're gonna skip that one. But afflicted and incorporeal did get spawning changes once again. So I think we talked a little bit about this last week, where they essentially reduced the spawn rate of it. And now there's been more changes, and essentially what they've done to afflicted and incorporeal is their previous logic was much like explosive, where every mob you were in combat with had a chance to spawn the affix. And so if you pull a bunch of mobs, you have a large number of potentially these spawns. Explosive was like this too.
Yeah.
Um, what they've done is they've changed the logic to spawn like Quaking's logic. So if you're not familiar with the way Quaking works, basically Quaking has a chance to spawn every 20 seconds, but not always every 20 seconds, meaning it could spawn on a 20-second cooldown or after the last time it's done on 40 seconds or on 60 seconds. So it's semi-random. It would always spawn at least once every 60 seconds. So you'd always get that 60-second one if it didn't spawn in the first two. Um, but sort of there was an internal cooldown and it would always spawn in those 20-second intervals. Essentially, Blizzard has applied that same logic to Afflicted and to Incorporeal. And so for Afflicted, these are the mobs where you have to like dispel them. Um, they will spawn on a 30-second interval. So every 30 seconds, you will either get 0 because it might skip,
Right.
1 or 2, basically. Um, so the idea now is that Afflicted will be every 30 seconds. You have a chance to spawn. It could skip it, but it'll at least be on that sort of timer. There will definitely be a weak aura for this because it'll be pretty simple to track that.
I have a quaking one right now.
Yeah,
It already checks it, and
modify.
so honestly, probably able to just copy like this thing is from Legion, right? It's not been
Yeah,
changed. Um, Probably possible to just copy it, change the timer, change the like buff that it looks for to trigger, and do it like that.
yeah, yeah. Just find the right spawn buff basically, and make it simple. And then Incorporeal, same exact logic, except Incorporeal's on a 45-second cooldown. Which this is the ones where you need to sort of stun or incapacitate the mob for it to despawn. And so the 45-second cooldown is really helpful. Aligns better with a lot of classes hard CCs. So you'll be able to maybe have, if everybody uses their CC on the first one, you're not sort of screwed or sort of lacking CC for the next one that comes up.
Right.
So 45-second cooldown is good. Um, so yeah, so that is sort of the updates to those two affixes, which I think generally is a good thing. The original spawn logic I think is like the idea of like pulling big and then getting a bunch of additional stuff to deal with, particularly like afflicted, like incorporeal. I never liked. I didn't like that with explosive,
Yeah.
and like adding anything like that is
And
super annoying.
it always had
Um,
problems. Like there were pulls in Underrot, if you remember, where you had a bunch of small mobs, and Underrot's coming
yeah,
back, so you would have this again. You have a bunch of small mobs and like two big mobs, and you just like get absolutely railed by explosives.
yeah,
The blobs, the like elemental blobs in Shrine of the Storms did this too. Like there's a just tons and tons of examples of just like a bunch of small mobs triggering explosives and just like it's awful. So yeah,
yeah. It's like and there's nothing you could do because she couldn't split the pull, so it was all that pull. Those type of pulls were always going to be bad. So even if you weren't trying to pull big through a dungeon and go quickly,
yeah.
you still would run into issues with yeah, just the random nature of the spawns. So the spawns being um built upon the number of mobs you have in combat. I mean, you can go back to like Waycrest Manor too, and a lot of those hallway pulls, particularly on like what is it, Rat Gut,
Yeah,
that one boss
yeah.
on the right hand side, like that whole hallway and hit that room that boss was in was always an issue with stuff like that.
Yep.
So, but cool, yeah. So that's a good nerf, good change. We'll say not maybe not nerf, but good change to those abilities to put them on an ICD. Um, so cool. Maybe one more thing before we get into some of the fun interview topics. Blizzard did clarify how Spark of the Shadow Flame will be acquired. So Spark of the Shadow Flame is the new crafted or one of the crafting reagents that you need to craft the season 2 versions of your gear. So basically allows you to increase the overall item level of what you're crafting. It allows you to sort of upgrade it to like I don't know what the max is.
Yeah, so
The whole crafting system is weird.
this is the equivalent of the Spark of Ingenuity. This is the one like
Correct.
you
Yeah.
have to have this in order to
Mhm.
craft something at or craft one of the good items at season 2 item level.
Mhm.
Well, actually, I think you can still use Spark of Ingenuity. It's just capped at season 1 item levels.
Correct. Yeah, you can't upgrade it beyond whatever the max is now. I don't want to misquote myself, but yeah. So
Yeah,
you need the Spark of the Shadow Flame to craft a season 2 version of it, and that allow you to upgrade it to the max season 2 item level.
yeah.
So it does require recrafting of things, but so Blizzard did clarify the way that these will work is that you will essentially get one Spark of the Shadow Flame every 2 weeks. So basically, each week you'll have something to do. It gives you a splintered spark, and then you need two splintered sparks to make a full spark to then use for crafting. They clarified every 2 weeks you will get one, but you will get a full spark the first week. Basically, you'll get the
Which
quest, the
means
typical
this
quests.
next week, this coming week.
Yeah, yeah. So the first week of 10.1, once it's launched, you'll be able to get a spark of Shadow Flame. Just because you'll get the typical quest to get a splintered one, and then in week 1 there's a tutorial quest that gives you an extra splinter. That means in week 1, 3, 5, essentially odd weeks, you'll get a new spark to craft a new item on a set schedule. And there's no more random drops after you get it. So this is literally
Thank
every two
fuck.
weeks you will get, yeah, a
I
new spark. So
I know like there were two types of or three types of people in regards to the bottled essence system. there are the people that flew around digging up all of the dirt in the Dragon Isles, try and get
Yeah.
one.
God.
Successful or no, but they did it.
Uh-huh.
Then there's the people who didn't, broken down into two camps. People who got lucky and got them anyway. People who did not get lucky and have seen 0 or 1. And
That is hilarious.
it's like, I'm like, none of those were great. Like the people who were happy are the ones who didn't try and got lucky and got it, which
Uh-huh.
is like great. Um, but nobody else was happy with the bottled essence system.
No, not at all. And like, yeah, even someone like me who like I don't do a ton of Mythic Plus, so I use the crafting system a fair amount for like even my main. I ended up getting pretty lucky, I'll say. I never was without a spark, but there were definitely times where I'm like using my last spark to craft something to fill a hole and then
Yeah,
like needing one maybe for the next week and luckily getting it. So I was definitely in that. Didn't farm them, but got lucky enough that I never was without. So
yeah. One of the
um
nice things about this is it means that if you play multiple specs, you're not going to be in this situation where like you have high eye level gear for one spec, but then you like can't like you can't get a Mistweaver or something. Like I went. We needed a healer for some keys, so I was going to play Mistweaver.
yeah.
I was the only one that actually had a healing spec of the 5 people we had in the group.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I didn't have any sparks left because I had used them all for Brewmaster. And so I went and I crafted the non-spark ones. So I'm running
Nice.
around with like 340 weapons
That is
as an
awesome.
eye level like a 415 character.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Um, nice. Yeah, and I think I know that there'll probably be questions too about this since we do get these next week. Like what you should craft. Um, and so like I think for Mistweaver, the general consensus is like a one-hander is sort of the best place to put your first spark. Just to get a weapon. Because that typically has the largest impact. And I think a lot of the weapons there's number one, there's actually not a lot of Mythic Plus weapons available to monks, to Mistweavers. Coming up. I think there's only like 4 total or 5 total. I was talking to June about this and they were like, "Is this it?" Like asking the question. I'm like, "I think so." So Mythic Plus doesn't have a lot of options than the raid stuff. I think there's of course like 2 or 3 there, but it just depends on your progression. So I know for Mistweaver, I think we're saying one hander is like the best use of your first spark. So
Yeah, for Brewmaster, not weapons. Well, I guess it depends on how hard you are planning to go for the Frog Tusk weapon,
gotcha.
because your best setup is probably just two of those. Um, Two of those. There's Forge Storm as well, which is more single target, so that one's good. But like basically, there's two different cantrip weapons that are desirable.
Hmm.
Um, and you not the cantrip two-handed weapon. Handed weapon you don't. Um, but so it's like if you're going really hard for those, you don't want to craft a weapon because then you're just like throwing away your spark. Um, but you might get unlucky and that is a good craft, especially because you know that you will be getting more sparks. So
Right.
you can do the craft of a weapon, and if it takes you, 6 weeks to actually see that second Grog Tusk, or what have you, then the weapon will be very good for that time period. So that's like, it's there's. I would not actually craft something next week unless you really, really need it. Like you're re-rolling and you just have really low item level pieces.
Uh-huh.
Um, I would wait. I would hold on to it. And wait until you get items from raid or from keys, and then make a decision based on what you actually get to draw. Because there is no worse feeling than like crafting an item and then immediately replacing it from,
Yeah.
which I have had happen
Yeah.
on alts. Like you need decent eye level to get into a pug key. And so I've made like crafted weapons and stuff on them going Like I did this on my mage. I made weapons. I went into my first key. Weapon drops, and it's just like,
Right.
well, that spark's never. And it,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gone.
That's a dead spark. Yeah. Yeah. That's, and I think, I mean, I would say too, like that's really good advice just in general about crafting is like probably wait until after your raid week's done or even like your Mythic Plus push is done and sort of craft stuff late just to fill in holes for next week. Um, but at a certain point you want to use them for sure. So don't just sit on them for like 2 weeks and
Yeah,
not
yeah.
craft anything.
Definitely
Um,
like use them, especially because you know you're getting more. Unlike the bottled essence system where you had like the five and it beyond that, good luck.
yeah.
Because you know you're getting more, it's definitely worth just spending. And eventually you'll run out of stuff for your main spec, and then you can craft stuff for an off spec, and that's nice.
What are those? No, awesome. Yeah. Um, well, cool. Well, I think now we can sort of start to jump into a couple of the interviews that occurred. So there was a ton of interviews, a ton of group interviews actually this week. So much less one-on-ones, much more in terms of like groups of teams interviewing, a group of like 1 to 2 Blizzard developers. So I wanted to start with the Ian and Josh Augustine interview,
Yeah,
because I think that one had probably of this week the most interesting both questions and then like responses are really like behind the scenes action, like behind the scenes answers to what was happening. So one of the big things that came out of this interview was there was a question around design philosophy that was asked. And basically, the idea is that like with Dragonflight, there seems to be a general feeling of much more transparency and responsiveness, right, to players, particularly when it comes to feedback or just in general communication, right? Um, and I believe Ian responded to this one. Basically, number one was like, yeah, our old approach wasn't working. The idea that we we were like I think he doesn't really say this, but it seemed like the people who are running WoW now held WoW in such reverence that they didn't want to change the formula, right? Like this is the way the game had been developed, and this is the approach that they had for the last 15, 20 years of the game being the game, and they were going to continue doing that because that's what made World of Warcraft, right? And I think what they realized, and sort of I think what Dragonflight is like sort of the coming of age tale, we could say, if we can use that terminology, is that approach doesn't work with like today's game, right? Like the idea of like it's always been this way, so it must be this way. I think needs to change, and so like that was the big part of this answer. And it wasn't just a hey, we're gonna switch this. It was, I guess Ian says it was much more of like looking at different portions of the game and seeing what changes make sense, seeing where they're seeing like the most like difficult feedback, right? Or the
right.
loudest feedback, and then looking to see to change those areas. So they talk a lot about that around like character investment becoming more account wide investment, which is sort of like I think a larger change, right? Um, and then the idea of like being more transparent also allows the developers to be able to make more mistakes. And I guess maybe not mistakes is the wrong way to phrase it, but to take more chances, right? To try things, and because there's an open feedback loop, or there's an understanding that like if the community doesn't really like it, Blizzard will listen, or vice versa, right? Like if the community really wants something, Blizzard will take into account, or Blizzard can be transparent and say, hey, we tried this, we messed up, or we'll do better next time.
Yeah,
I think just overall helps the game. So um yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of the gist of this answer was a lot of like they felt a ton of reverence to the way the game had been sort of developed and designed for since its sort of creation, and they didn't want to change that, and kind of got to a boiling point of saying like we either lose the game or we make the changes, right? We lose like the community that likes this game or that plays it, and so yeah, it was a really good answer. And it was like, I mean, I think it mirrors like exactly what I think you and I have talked about here of like Dragonflight just seems like a an expansion that kind of almost reminds me a little bit of MOP playing through that, where like we had the ghost crawler type updates, like Dev Water
yeah,
Cooler, like the feedback, like the behind the scenes, like, hey, we're making this change. This is why, or this is our thought process here. Um, and yeah, it kind of got lost after Greg left. So yeah, but now we're sort of seeing a resurgence of it, which is cool. yeah, so good
Yeah.
answer. I really liked it. Made sense, and hopefully they continue. It sounds like they're going to continue down this path. So or path. So
Yeah, yeah. Jumping forward a little bit in the interview, they had a question about reviving old dungeons. Like we had Temple of the Jade Serpent this season. It is pre Mythic Plus. We had the Warlords dungeons last season that were Mythic Plus, and now we're getting Vortex Pinnacle, which is from Cataclysm. I think one of the interesting things about Vortex Pinnacle that they touch on here is that there is actually a lot of work needed to get Vortex Pinnacle to the point that it could be a Mythic dungeon. So they mention visual fidelity work, the mechanics. You know, we talked about this before. It's like white and gray wind mechanics on light backgrounds.
yeah,
It like noon in the day, so the whole thing's very bright. And so they had to make some changes to the mechanics to make them visible that like honestly didn't matter that much version of it because like the other thing is that they're just actually aren't or weren't they've updated the bosses weren't very
right.
many mechanics on the bosses. I did a Vortex Pinnacle run on PTR before they revamped the bosses, and we just went through it. It's like, so where were the mechanics?
Yeah,
Like
they like
the
two
last
mechanics. Right?
boss, the last boss had mechanics, like two or three mechanics. It was like honestly mostly fine. But the others, you just like do the boss, and it's like, okay, like we just literally single targeted it down. Well, like no mechanics happen, at least
Yeah.
compared to what is currently considered mechanics. I remember wiping many times on that first boss in Vortex Pinnacle back in the day, in
Oh,
heroic LFGs.
yeah, because people didn't know how like
The
the tornado
shield,
mechanic worked, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they would
yeah,
just like die. Yep.
yeah, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, no, yeah. So that was a good, yeah, and that's sort of the idea too of like they also referenced in that same answer like Shattered Halls, which if you played during BC was considered like the hardest dungeon they've ever put out. Like heroic Shattered Halls was like I remember having to do that to get attuned to I think it was like to get attuned to Serpentine or to
Yeah.
Tempest Keep. And we basically would set up where we'd have to do like one our good players would do a run through, get to like the end, and then summon a bunch of our bad players or like less good players into the dungeon to like complete that part of the quest.
Yeah.
Um, but it and the only reason it was hard, they were mentioned as hard there is because there was large packs of mobs that are new, right? That's like a new idea. Um, and so the actual mechanics weren't bad. It was just like
They
there's a
were
ton of burst damage.
Well, it was that,
So
and it was threat. It
yeah,
was
threats. Yeah,
protection warrior. Was in some ways it's actually very funny looking at it from a like post TBC classic
yeah,
kind of era because obviously like protection paladins existed in largely the state that they were in 2.4 in beginning of TBC,
yeah,
but were not really used because the mentality was that protection warrior was the only thing.
yeah.
And
Exactly.
protection warrior's AoE threat was not good. So when you had a pack of like 6, 7 enemies, the protection warrior, like the mechanic was AoE threat that you were struggling against, and like they have stuff that you kick, not very much.
Right. Yeah.
Um, it really was AoE threat, and that's just not a like. It's still a frustration point these days, but it's not like a challenging mechanic that people have to play around. It's like sometimes you just randomly lose a DPS because
Exactly. Exactly. Um, but yeah, that was sort of a interesting question on like the dungeons. They did ask, or we did it. There was a question asked about the new privating debuff information flag. So we talked about this, I think, a little bit. So if people aren't aware, there's a new flag in 10.1 that allows Blizzard to basically private specific auras. So they could either be buffs or debuffs. Basically, what it means is that add-ons cannot interact with the aura, meaning they don't get any information about what the aura is. And like, so I think you can put up a specific frame just to display the aura, but there's nothing you can do to like read information about what the aura is, its duration, the name of it, all
yeah,
that sort of stuff that you did. And they sort of talk a little bit about the fact like the reason they're doing this is really not to combat uh not talking about add-ons that sort of change visuals, but it's more in the computational stuff. So it's the idea of like I think the best example in recent memory is like the jailer bombs in phase one of
Yep.
like as soon as you get a debuff, you are basically given a specific like hole to jump into, and like it happens instantaneously. And so the only issue that you have is can you follow the weak aura in time and make it to your hole, right? And so Blizzard to like combat the fact that they can do that has to make changes to the way that debuff works. Like number one, it's got to be fairly deadly because if you mess it up, it's got to kill you, right? Number two, it's got to be quick, meaning like the time to make a decision about where to go has to be like 3 to 4 seconds, right?
Right.
Um, Versus like if they were able to private that aura, you can probably do a couple of things. You can make it less deadly because you can account for people messing it up, but then also you can make it longer, meaning you can give people more time to like speak or like talk about, okay, I'm going here, I'm going
Yep.
there,
Yep.
right? And that's sort of what they're trying to push with this idea of privating information is to sort of reduce the arms race of weak auras and other add-ons that essentially tell you exactly how to react to a debuff. Um, and then make it more of a mechanic where you have to communicate with your team, which it will be interesting to see. I hated with a passion Mechatork and the bombs in phase, like the intermission phase,
Yeah.
because there was if and everyone has this in their raid, but there's always the one person you never want to get that mechanic. Like and like without fail, that one person would get that mechanic. And it was always that like in my like this is where it takes me out of playing the game because like as a healer, I generally rarely got the debuff right to do that. Like I
Right.
think just based on the way that targeting worked, healers weren't targeted too often by that. But yeah, when that one person would be, I literally would stop playing the game and just start praying like to whatever deity that you believe in. To be like, just please, can you just figure this? Like, just use your microphone works. Check, like, call out the right symbol, please. Whatever
Yep.
Lord Savior. Um, and so that affected me, I think, a lot more.
The
But I get the idea of it. Like, yeah,
yeah, like
that's a
the
very like localized thing for me. So
right, like the Megatork one is unique in that it wasn't just that, like a weak aura couldn't solve it for you. It was also that it required this. It was forced communication, right? Versus like the
yeah,
hypothetical nerfed jailer bomb. You wouldn't necessarily have to communicate. You might start moving towards a hole, see somebody else is going to beat you there, and then change directions and go towards a different hole, and that's like
right.
way different from the Mechatork thing. So as far as this stuff, they did say in the interview that they are being fairly conservative with it in
Mhm.
Avarice. Um, but I'm really curious what that's going to be. So it's not like it's every buff for debuff. You are going to see stuff like we were talking before the podcast about amalgamation chamber, or actually maybe
Yeah,
about amalgamation chamber and the debuff changes on that. Those will still show up. Those aren't private auras. I actually don't know what the private auras are.
yeah. I
Probably
don't know
find
either
out.
actually.
But
Yeah,
I suspect it's some stuff on Sarkareth because I haven't run into it really.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's going interesting. I'm hopeful about this. I
yeah. I mean,
I think that if you look at the list of things that I really really have not liked about raiding the past couple of expansions, almost every one involves some kind of like computational assignment weakora. Like not all
yeah,
of them, but there's a very high number. Nobody likes
yeah.
those kind of weakoras. It's not that we don't like weakoras, but we definitely don't like those ones. So anything to like get rid of those without harming the overall like let us still use weakores to show stuff about procs or stuff like that. Just
Right.
don't you know don't let us use it for assigning things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's that, and hopefully that's what they target. And I think, I mean, to be honest with you, I think more raid communication is always good. Like, I think it makes it fun. I will say that, like, as a parallel, like, I've been, oh, excuse me, I've not been playing a lot of WoW lately, but I've been playing a ton of Destiny 2, and it's interesting doing the raids in Destiny 2 in that there's a lot of call outs that happen, right? And so it would be, it's a different mentality, right? Because Destiny 2 raids are 6 people, so it's a much smaller amount of people calling
Right.
things out. But it does create like a different environment. Like um, as a personal thing, I just did a raid and like we had call outs of like areas of the room that we were fighting the boss in, and it was like parking lot, Home Depot, and Apple Store. And it was just funny when people are like, "Boss is at Apple Store," like bombs are dropped at Apple Store. I'm going to Home Depot. It's like an interesting like during the raid, just like hearing like listen, like just hearing it, I thought was funny. So it'd be cool if I would be fine with it in WoW used in limited cases where like that type of communication is needed.
Yeah.
It just I will say it becomes somewhat annoying or maybe just personally annoying when like you know this mechanic is coming and there's just one person on the team that you're just like, just please just don't give it to this person.
Yeah.
Um, but I think
Um,
that changes if like with more experience, if it's a more common thing. So
yeah. There's also so moving on from that, there's some questions about transmog and loot in general. One thing I wanted to bring out from this is we talked about the new transmog role option last week, but we weren't entirely sure what it was going to, whether it was just a cosmetic change. They
uh-huh.
confirmed in the interview it is not just cosmetic. Rolling for transmog on an item has higher precedence than rolling greed on an item. So
Yep.
that
But
means
lower than need.
lower than need. So
Yeah.
need rolls beat transmog rolls beat greed rolls obviously beat pass, and if everybody passes, anybody can just pick it up off the corpse. So
Yep.
that will make it slightly easier to acquire those transmog pieces in pugs and in LFR. Uh, so that will be nice.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, the other I think the other thing that I thought was interesting was I don't know if it was in this interview, but I know that Ian went into a little bit of detail on Dragonriding. And basically the fact that like his point was like literally the week of 10.0, we realized we're never gonna get rid of Dragon. Like
yeah,
can't
that
like
was
we
this
just can't get
interview.
rid of
Yeah,
it. Yeah, he basically that was the point of like the amount of feedback that we receive and the amount of like I think fun even the developers have had playing with it is like we will figure out a way to bring this forward. And that of course brings more challenges like that he talks about, which is like so now we have to talk about if we do want to keep this around, and we think we do, what does that do to like the old mount system, right?
right.
Because dragon riding is a very specific thing within dragon flight. So you have like your dragon riding mounts and stuff like that. But there still is, which is fine for something new, but you still have, some people have 600 old mounts, right? Like,
Right.
and
And
as a,
not
yeah,
all of them fit neatly into the dragon riding model of
exactly.
like the abilities that you have for that. Thinking of something like the different Zereth Mortis mounts, they're all very different. They're like that, like, or the
Yeah.
old gyrocopter mount, right, from DBC. Like, how does that fit into dragon riding? It really
Yeah.
doesn't fit into dragon riding, and so they have a hard problem to solve here. And it may be that not every mount ultimately gets dragon riding. They didn't say this, but
Yeah. That's the implication. Yeah.
yeah,
But it's cool that they've sort of been up like Ian's basically coming out and say, yeah, we think this is also super cool and something we want to keep forward. And I'd agree. I mean, dragon riding to me is the best new feature that WoW's had in probably ever. Like since probably original flying was a thing. So yeah, it was super cool. The other thing I wanted to touch on quick is and something that is near and dear to my heart is they talked a little. There's a bunch of questions around cross faction guilds and like just cross faction activities. Um, yeah, I think one of the big things is that sort of Ian spent a little bit of time discussing was the technical challenges of this. Meaning, like they basically have a base game that was built on having two factions that did not commingle, and so like untangling that for like all that code and all that stuff is difficult on top of the idea that like in many cases there's still people who play Warcraft because it's Horde versus Alliance, right? And so they
yeah,
want to keep basically the cross faction stuff to things that are opt-in, meaning like opt into instances, opt into guilds, right? Opt into that sort of instance and like planned group content. So like it seems like right now like the queuing system, which I think does do it today, or no, it doesn't. Sorry. So like the queued stuff is probably going to stay separate, um, and stuff like that. But at least for like the instance, like find a group, type content, or like join a group type content, like Mythic Plus or raids, those will be cross faction.
Yeah.
Um, and they said they're going to slowly. I mean, I think they're being very cautious about how they spread this out further into the game. It wouldn't surprise me if like guilds might end up being like the limit for now, and like we sort of see like this feature sort of sit a little dormant after guilds go in.
Yeah, I
Um,
think there's a couple of interesting points that they, you know, mentioned for like world content, which would be the like last thing that I would really care about. Like I don't care about being able to go into like Stormwind or whatever.
yeah,
As a horde player, I do not care at all. Um, but there's stuff like faction specific quest lines. So like where's like if I join a cross faction group for questing stuff happens. It's not
right,
just
yeah,
and so when you say quest lines, it's not just quest lines, it's also like phasing, cross like faction specific phasing because the phasing is tied to faction specific quests.
oh
Um
yeah,
and so there's a whole can of worms there. So I don't like on the one hand it would be good to be able to do some world content stuff and then cross faction group like thinking like the current soup event and stuff like that
yeah,
would be kind of nice. Um but honestly, beyond that, I don't know what I would do in a cross faction group. Like the main thing, if I'm not like the main thing would be to be able to play a opposite faction character with friend leveling. But
right.
if questing is just like hard blocked on these faction specific quests, um, then that's just like dead in the water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, we'll see what they do with it, but yeah, I mean, those are sort of the big thing, and like you said, the instant stuff, like the fact that like just a quick example, like most expansion introductory quests are very faction specific, so it's like, how do you handle that in a cross faction group? Like, does the leader turn everybody to alliance, right? If the leader's alliance, do just the alliance centric ones. Um, Yeah, we'll see. I mean, they do have a little bit of a precedence with the whole idea of like cross faction transfers, like the idea that they do have a mapping of like what faction specific stuff becomes another faction's things. But yeah, we'll see what that goes. I didn't think there was anything too big with the rest of this. There's a little bit of a story stuff we didn't cover, but I think that's most of um from the large group interview with Ian and shoot, what was the other gentleman's name? Josh. Um, there was a couple other interviews that came out. There was one with Max did with Morgan, which of course I listened to 'cause Morgan. But again, nothing too big that came out of this one. I think other than what we haven't talked about today, Morgan did ask questions about UI updates, and Morgan did specifically talk a little about nameplates being a large discussion
Fuck
in the team, which
you.
is yeah, which is what we've talked about. Is like that's probably the in the current base UI, probably the worst feeling portion of it is when you get tons of mobs on the screen and like how the nameplates work. It's very difficult to identify specific mobs and all that fun stuff we've talked about. So
There was another thing in there about buff and debuff filtering, and I think that this ultimately boils down to their system design. Because
mhm,
back in BFA, I would have said that buffs and debuffs are like one of the things that needed to revamp the most. Because your buff bar was just like full of these temporary Azurite buffs, and like if you had different eye levels of Azurite, you might have multiple different copies of the buff at the same time for a
mhm.
single Azurite trait and all this different stuff. And it was a mess. The buff bar was unusable. You had to have custom UI, uh, or you just like couldn't play the game. You couldn't track your important like spec buffs, anything. It was unusable. Um, the death of Azurite, the death of like the soulbind system from Shadowlands was really bad about this too. Um, it has made it much more usable. So now I am less like I feel the need for that less. I actually just right now use the base. Um, like I have unit frames, but I use the base
Mhm.
action bars and base buff frames, and that is like mostly enough. And if there's certain things that I have weak auras to track, right? Um, but a lot of the time you can actually just use the buff frames, and that's a very significant improvement over the situation previously.
Gotcha, gotcha. Um, but yeah, the Max interview wasn't too groundbreaking in the questions that were asked. So
I wanted to bring up one thing which is relevant for tanks, the Onyx Annulet from patch 10.7. Um, they
Oh yeah.
are not planning to nerf it until at least 10.1.5, which means you probably have
Oh.
like a couple months more of using it. Maybe they nerf it in 10.15. Currently for tanks, we'll just never replace it until next expansion if they don't nerf it. So um, it may not. It sounds like it may not be a forever ring for tanks, but at least for right now, it is.
Nice. Um, nice, yeah. So cool. Yeah, that was the Max interview. Ian did another interview with a bunch of NA content creators more again in a group setting. Um, I think the only highlight that I had, I don't know if you had anything from this one, was just there did ask a couple questions about the new upgrade system. And I think the main thing that I took from it was that basically Blizzard wasn't happy with the fact that you could essentially spam low mythic plus to get an item and then upgrade it all the way to max item level. So the new system is basically meant to like correct that, where you have to do sort of appropriate level content to then upgrade the item to like the max that it can be, which means like if you're doing, you know, twos and threes, you can only upgrade an item you get in a level two so far, right?
Yeah.
You won't be able to upgrade it to max. It'll definitely be short. I think you mentioned this. That's why you want to, you know, if you're min maxing, you want to do level 17 keys,
Yes. Yeah.
because that'll drop an item where you can upgrade to the max from a mythic plus point of view.
Yeah.
Um,
The I don't know, like I understand why they see it as a problem, and I kind of don't like it as like a way to get the item. Like it's always I've been there and I've done that of just spamming twos for an item when you
yeah.
just like have enough valor to upgrade it to the cap anyway. May as well just do twos. Um, it's not fun to do it that way. I don't like doing it that way. On the other
Yeah.
hand, we this is a unfun negative interaction with the -10 to your keystone levels. Like you do your like let's say you start off the season with a +10 key. You go
Mhm.
in, you get exactly like you get your Krog Tusk out of your +10 under. Well, that's now capped at
Exactly.
eye level 334. And it's granted only 7 eye levels cap. So it's still very good.
Mhm.
But it didn't count for like actually getting the item you wanted. And that kind of like I
I
I
think
don't
there.
know
So
how to
that's.
solve that.
But I think that issue is a very much a week one issue.
Yeah.
Right. Like once you get through that and you're capable of doing say you're plus 17 every week, like the
Yeah.
next week you're going to get a key that's plus 17, right?
Yeah.
And so like you're not going to run into that issue of like doing a dungeon that drops the item you want at a lower item level. Now you might still do that if you're helping a friend or a buddy,
Right.
or like if you're like, yeah, I'm helping a friend gear up, so I'll do lower level keys. But in my mind, you're doing that not to get gear, you're doing that to
To
help
help
a
somebody.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
so like
even
I think
then
that's
like
the difference, right?
yeah, even then, right? We're talking about the upgrade cap being like significantly closer to I
Yeah.
actually there's a graphic somewhere. I should pull up that graphic and check. So like champion gear caps at 337. I know that is correct. Um but then hero gear caps at 441. Yeah. Caps at 441. Veteran gear, which is the one below that, caps at 424.
Mhm.
So it's a much bigger gap. So like if you get something from a uh yeah, okay, I guess you would have to go all the way down to a plus 8. So you have to go pretty far down before you're capped at 424. I don't know, maybe it's fine. Like
Yeah.
maybe it's fine.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is like, yeah, like it's not as I think the system is fine in terms of like adding in caps of like doing that and like the to your like I think where the frustration will come is like if you're not doing the content that is your level like a level
Yeah.
appropriate to you and you get the item you want.
Yeah.
Right? That's where the frustration is going to come in and then like you it's like saying, like, to me, like the Mythic Plus example, like if you move it into raid, it's like, oh, I get the Broodkeeper trinket I want, but because I was doing LFR just because I was bored.
Yeah.
And now great, I get it on LFR, so I can upgrade it all the way to Mythic and be like be fine. Like that to me
Yeah.
feels
And I'm glad
off,
that you
right?
can't do that because then you end up in the situation. Like, I'm glad that grinding twos is not the optimal way to get the item you want. I'm glad that doing
Yeah,
LFR and normal and heroic every week for, your chance at the Broodkeeper trinket is not the optimal way to do it. Um, I don't know that there's a winning kind of like the only
yeah, I
winning
mean,
move for that is honestly probably what they picked, which is just to say no. At some point, there is how high you
yeah, exactly.
um,
Yeah,
and just like at some point there's a limit. Because I really would not want to be in a world where like, oh, I want this item from raid, let me go and do LFR and normal and heroic
God, dude.
every.
Oh, I would hate it. I would hate it. Yeah, yeah. Um, but cool. Yeah. So that was sort of the big one out of that is that that's sort of what they're doing. Um, they talked to there was a couple of questions on like changing the way that Mythic raid lockouts work, basically allowing for more pug Mythic. I don't I like Blizzard's answer. Blizzard's basically like, no. Like the idea of Mythic is very much a like coordinated activity you do with a set group. And they don't want to they don't want it to have similar rules or similar ability LFR, or sorry, like normal or heroic, right? Which normal or heroic
uh,
is meant to be that sort of pug experience. So
I don't like this because
Fair.
while the later bosses definitely fill that role that you just described,
Mhm.
the earlier bosses don't. And there is just nothing more frustrating trying to do a mythic pug than like you get in a group and they can kill the first boss and then they just disband before they pull the second one. Right?
Yeah, and now that's your lockout. Yeah,
And then you're saved and you're like you're not nobody's gonna join a 1 of 8 mythic lockout. They're gonna join a 0 of 8 mythic lockout and go do the first boss for the loot.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I can see that being an issue. I I have always liked the idea that like the from a PvE content perspective, like the max that you can do should be done with a consistent group of people, right? Like and I think the main reason for that, and it's I don't know the way that I sort of playing so much Destiny 2 in my mind is sort of like looking at the way other games treat it is like Destiny 2 treats it like it does heroic, meaning like
Right.
you can jump in a raid, do like 2 bosses, jump out, go back in and do those same 2 bosses with a different group. You don't get loot from it.
Right.
Or I think you get lower item level loot, the equivalent there. But you can still like do the content again and again and again if you want, right? But the idea there is that the loot in that game is very much like a Diablo game where like
Right.
you're trying to get it's random rolls, you're trying to get like your god roll or your good roll
Right.
of like an item that you want. Where like with WoW, it's very like the drop, right? Like it could drop with a tertiary, which is different, but in general, it's always going to have the same stats on it, right? And so for me, like that's from my point of view, because that's there, the idea of like rerunning a boss or like not having a consistent group to go through it. I don't know. I have a weird connection with loot in that regard.
I just
Um,
like it's just really frustrating. Like you knowing that you can do the first 3 bosses
mhm,
and then not bothering because it sucks trying to pug it for systemic
mhm.
reasons. Not like the players suck, not like the bosses suck, just like the lockout system is the blocker. The
Yeah,
lockout system is why I gave up trying to pug Mythic because it's just you put in a bunch of effort trying to get into a good group and they just disband, and now you're
yeah,
saved. I mean, your lockout screwed. Like I just stopped bothering. Um, that
yeah.
sucks. Like that shouldn't be the reason that I'm not doing those Mythic runs. Now, this season we actually had a really good in guild alt Mythic. Uh,
Mhm.
really good. We only ever did 2 bosses because we did the 2 bosses with very rare loot, and that meant that nobody ever got any other like nobody wanted Taros or Sinarth.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so we just did those 2, and I think like every alt in that run has the air dog ring and an icon. It's
That's
hilarious.
awesome.
Um,
That is awesome.
but the I don't like that answer. I like it almost feels like there's a point where they like there's a point in the instance like maybe you reach you know a certain depth into a wing. Parag saves you. Dathia saves you. Like
Yeah.
current bossy. And then beyond that, it functions like or prior to that, it functions like heroic. Because like the first four really, um, this tier are like I wouldn't want to pug Sanarth, but you could.
Yeah.
You totally could. It would require a ton of effort to set up a competent. Totally could.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess more option is always better. Like I think that to that point, like being able to pug Mythic like that is always better. It's just yeah, I'm old and stubborn and
Old
I
and
feel
crotchety.
yeah, I feel like, Mythic's Mythic. But no, I can see that, yeah, if you did want to do the pug stuff. I think at that point for me, though, like personally, if I had an alt that I was like, I want to do Mythic with, like it would be to find a group that basically to find like an alt guild, right? Or like a
Yeah.
group that is driven or led by the same person every week. And so
Yeah.
you know that like they're gonna get at least a handful of things
Yeah.
done.
I mean
So rather
that's the ideal. That's the
yeah.
ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Um
I don't like that answer, but
sorry.
yeah. They also talked about the health tuning. There was a question about the health tuning about why that's happening again. And so the answer that Ian gave is basically that the kind of initial thing that they were looking at is the amount of survivability people were getting, the amount of self-sustain and things like that people were getting from, or just the amount of uh, read the quote. The 25% change in 10.1 is less about scaling and more about continuing to come to terms with the amount of throughput and survivability increases from the entire talent system. So basically, talent's too strong.
Yeah.
And so basically, they were looking like they did the 40% increase for Dragonflight launch, but quote, what they saw from data is they should have done closer to a 66% increase, which is more or less what we're getting now.
Yeah, which and they even say like 40% was a big number to them at the time. So
Yeah.
like going to 66% off the initial one would have been yeah, even scarier. So yeah, it's just like yeah, just treat that tuning of health and damage increase as just an extension of what they did in 10.0, which is fair.
Yeah.
Um
They also said there are plans to balance defensiveness and survivability. They don't want homogenization, but they are aware that people get benched at times because even though their throughput is good, they die. Like their
yeah,
class is
hunters.
just hunters. Okay, hunters. There's the hunters survivability bad kind of like meme, but hunters actually have a
Yeah.
ton of defensive cooldowns now. They have
It
more
was
than
yeah, with
some
like
tanks.
yeah, with like Exil and Turtle, yeah, and
Exil,
that stuff.
Turtle, and like they have four cooldowns. Four.
Yeah.
Um, and Exil has a ton of CDR. So like they're actually like in terms of burst damage, extremely good. And that's kind of the same
Yeah.
thing where like Mage, in terms like against a burst, they're great. Um, it's the sustained the rot damage that gets
Uh-huh.
hunters,
Yeah.
that gets mages, and so you see some fights like Kurog. You can't just
Right.
on Kurog sit in turtle for or sit in ice block for 10 seconds. That's not effective.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
going to die to the rot damage on that fight, and there's very little that you can do about it other than just like chaining cooldowns, which you can do on that fight. Damage going. Like
Yeah.
you when you get to something that has rot damage plus burst damage, where you can't use your cooldowns for both. Uh, like Hunter's a bad example because Hunters are just like Hunters haven't made. But some other classes like historically Retribution Paladin's been really bad in this
Yeah.
regard. They had Bubble and they had Shield of Vengeance. And Shield of Vengeance is a DPS button, very much like Windwalker with Karma.
Yeah.
Windwalker is doing better because Windwalker now has access to Expel Harm for some self sustain, Revivifies for some self sustain, free instant Vivifies, and also having Karma, Dampen Harm, Diffuse Magic, and Fort. So like there's like a lot more that they have access to now.
Right. Yeah.
Versus how it used to be. And I haven't played Retribution Paladin since work. I assume it's better now. But there's still a lot of inequality between like the classes with a lot of innate tankiness, like a warlock, and the classes that don't have that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's good that they're taking a look at that, and maybe we'll see some changes there. So, um, cool. I don't know if there's anything else on the NA content creator interview you wanted to bring up. I think we've talked about most of it. Um, the EU one just had one thing that I wanted to sort of touch on, which was actually the trading card game mounts. So like somebody asked a question about like with the initial trading post mount was like one of the first store mounts that Blizzard had ever released. They sort of allowed you to get it essentially for free by playing the game. And so people were wondering like, will some other like promotional type mounts come back through the trading post? And basically the answer was potentially, but they'll be very careful about it. And I think the idea is like there are certain items and mounts out there that hold a sort of like reverence within the community, I'll say. And so like putting them on the trading post would sort of I think diminish that. And also, I mean, to be fair, like it would sort of probably piss a bunch of people off. And so the main one that people always bring up is the Swift Spectral Tiger. This is a trading card game mount that I have seen at its peak sell for like thousands of dollars. Like I
Yeah.
think I saw one on eBay once that went for like $1,200 or something ridiculous. And so that is people will spend a lot of money just because this one is pretty rare. And so the idea is like that should never come back. Like that should be a trading card game thing. If you got it, great. If you don't got it, not a huge deal, right? Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
so the
just that.
ones we've had so far from the TCG are the more like B-list TCG mounts.
Yeah.
The ones that were technically TCG mounts and they had some value due to their scarcity, but
Mhm.
nobody really like the dragon mount that was the first TCG back as a twin drop. Um,
Yeah.
I couldn't have told you that was a TCG mount. Like Swift
I
Spectral
didn't know.
Tiger,
Yeah.
the like chicken mount, like those I know.
Yeah.
That one, like that's a like a C list mount.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not one of the big popular ones. So like making those available is fine. I am like it's a delicate thing to balance. I would say I hope that they don't make the same mistake as like Wizards of the Coast in their handling Magic the Gathering, where a bunch of the old cards are unobtainable at this point because of the fact that they won't re-release them. They have
Yeah.
said that we're never re-releasing these, and so they just like command really like um, individual fetch or not fetch like individual dual lands that you multiples of are in the like $1,000 range for some of the colors because of
That's crazy.
because
Yeah.
of that they won't reprint them and there aren't that many of them left anymore and people want them to play with. Now
Yeah.
mounts, a mount's a mount. They're all functionally the same, so that's a little bit different. And I'm
I
more
don't
okay with them being
I don't know
like
about that. I don't know about that.
they are function.
Mounts are
All mounts are
no.
functionally the same.
They got you got style and you got grace on a mount, man. Like their mounts are different. Like it doesn't, you gotta look good, you know?
From a gameplay perspective.
Dude,
Mounts are
listen,
all
I
functionally
agree.
the same. Like somebody on the Swift Spectral Tiger is not actually faster than
I
somebody
do
on a
do
regular
you
mount.
know that for a fact though?
I
Have you
do.
done the math?
I have done the math.
Oh, okay, fair. Okay,
Um,
fair enough. Fair enough. Fair
but
enough.
so like I'm more okay if they say like okay, Swift Spectral Tiger that's probably never coming back,
Yeah.
or at least if it does, it's gonna be like hard to get rare. Something like that. I'm more okay with, but I am hoping like Ian didn't commit to it never ever coming back.
Uh huh.
He said he would be surprised to see it come back, which is not
Yeah.
never, but not likely. So I hope that they don't like commit to it because
Yeah.
at some point there will be no more copies of it available. There will actually physically be no more copies of the Swift Spectral Tiger. They will all be attached to an account somewhere. And
Yeah,
then at that
exactly.
point, what?
Yeah. No, that's fair. So, but no, it was interesting to hear that come up.
There's
Sorry, did you have
also
anything? Yeah.
they talked a little bit about profession updates in the EU interview, specifically that they were vague about what that entails, which
Hmm.
they were. Um, and so basically, right now, the only profession updates for 10.1, there's a handful of new crafted items, new embellished items, basically. Um, and like there's the file call, which is a huge quality of life thing.
Yep.
Um, but nothing like there's no new skill trees, anything like that. All your new, not even like new caps for the skill trees, nothing like that. It's much more like horizontal progression, which personally I
Uh-huh.
like. It's going to give me a chance to max out my. Um, but from the sounds of it, that's intentional. Like the exact quote that I think is interesting is that they don't want to quote add more depth or complexity as the system is already complex, which is definitely true, and there are catch up concerns if they add more. They want professions to stay relevant each tier, um, which they are succeeding at thus far. Because
Yeah.
everybody, like we literally talked about it earlier on this show, unprompted, like crafted. Like, what are you crafting? Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
there is also another teaser. A couple of things regarding professions that will be on the 10.1.5 PTR.
Yeah. We'll see what
Uh,
those are.
so yeah,
Interesting. Interesting.
or well, okay,
Um,
that haven't been the what is like haven't been seen on the PTR, which it to
yeah.
me means that like it's on the 10.15 PTR because it just hasn't been seen on the 10.1 PTR.
Yeah.
But it could actually be in the light. I don't know. We'll
We'll
see.
see. Um, yeah, I think the only, I mean, I know we're coming up at time too. There wasn't really much remaining. They did go again, talked a little bit about communication in this interview too. Much the same what they said is just like they want to be more open, transparent, and hopefully the community respects that and doesn't hold their feet to the fire. If they say something's going to happen and it doesn't, which
Yeah.
I think we're pretty good about that. Cool. The only final point then I think we can wrap up is, of course, if you haven't seen it, both Method and Echo have announced their World First events. I will say go and check out the Echo trailer. I'm a little biased because Preheat, who I used to raid with, is now the media manager over there. He did that trailer, so I'm biased. I think it's absolutely amazing. But like, they need to hire him to do raid previews because like the cinematic nature of this trailer for the Echo Race World First event is like it's really good. So just go check it out, even if you're not rooting for
Nice.
Echo, which I'm not because I'm all in on NA. But the their that trailer is super cool for their event. But yeah, Method and Echo both announced theirs. They're doing some live stuff. And I'm assuming Liquid's doing something somewhere, but I haven't seen anything come out other than they're paying people to run splits with them again. So if you want some free gold and have some characters, run some splits next week.
Or
So
2 weeks, but yeah,
or 2 weeks. Sorry, yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right.
But yeah, I think that's it then.
That is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for watching and or listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Uh, Looking forward to 10.1. Just a couple days.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, that's going to be it for the show. I'm keeping things brief because I actually have a sore throat and my is killing me. So I'm
Oh
going to
no.
go not talk for a few hours. And we will see you next week.
Bye.